Welcome to the Mike and Doug Show. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Doug, how are you today?
Well, I'm good because I just read your blockbuster report. Oh my goodness, something I've been trying to figure out for years. ICE. Every time I say that word, ICE, what Intercontinental Commodity Exchange Incorporated, I used to spit because I knew that they were at the source of evil, but I had no idea what you have just discovered. And what's most interesting is the path that you came to discover it. So,
Tell me
how
about it.
tell us about that strange path of trying to figure out who Candace Owens is that led you to one of the biggest discoveries in terms of the manipulation of all markets globally that I have seen anywhere.
Well, if you remember how we discovered the Pirbright Institute, we were looking at who owned the coronavirus patents, and that led us to Baron Henry de Worms and the Rothschilds and Lord Rosebery. In this case, we were looking at little Candace Owens, and we were looking at we found it odd that her new father-in-law was a baron, and so we started digging into his background, and that led us to everything that we now can see about how the global metals business works, because that's the business he's been in for 50 years.
Now, this goes way back, and your article is absolutely stunning, especially because you came up with a really good term for it, filthy lucre. That's exactly what I had to look that up. But when I looked it up, I said, yes, that's exactly what drives these things. So tell us, who is this Michael Farmer? Is that, because I've just finished reading the report, I think it's still in draft condition. But who is this person and what is their association with the Rothschilds?
Michael Farmer is a lifelong trader in the what's called the metals business. And this is gold, silver, platinum, palladium, any kind of metal you can think of. And they call it in general non-ferrous metals. So this would be including all the precious metals that and the rare earth metals that are needed in technology today. And so what we started learning, it took us a while to start getting behind the propaganda of his resume to really start to understand who he is. And I would, I mean, even records within the metals business, people who have been following how gold and silver relate to currency going back 40, 50 years, identify him as a real sleeper. He's somebody that some authors rank above George Soros and T. Boone Pickens and uh, Warren Buffett and people like that. And you go, what? How come we've never heard of this guy? And as it turns out, it appears that our Lord Farmer is a kingpin in the whole banking global gold and silver business that was really has been controlled for centuries by the Rothschild banks and their related cousins like J.P. Morgan. And Michael Farmer is the man who managed the global trades business for these metals. And you might think, okay, that's kind of interesting. Where does this go? And what we have discovered explains to us, or explains to me, how this system of fiat currency works. And finally, I think I get how central gold, silver, and the precious metals are to the business itself, to the business of creating cash out of nothing. And I think that's what we're going to get into. And that's where I think Michael Farmer, in many ways, is the high priest of Mammon in London. And I don't say that lightly. Because as you know, I've reserved judgment on all these issues relative to currency and the Rothschilds and gold and silver, because I didn't get it. And as an engineer, I didn't get it. And I think as an engineer, I'm finally getting it. I'm finally understanding how this works. And as it's turning out, it's pretty simple. So some of our people actually prepared a one-page summary of how this whole system of fiat currency and its relationship to gold and silver works. It's dead simple, actually.
So, if I understand it right, it has a lot to do with corrupt auditors. And as you point out in your article, there's really only five major ones that do the big stuff. And so, what we're basically saying is corrupt auditors let them play like gold is in their possession when it's not. They might have some
Right.
paper note that says it is, but there might be 35,000 other places that also have a paper note that say that they have that gold in their possession for a moment because they leased the gold, as well as the spoofing of the silver market up and down. And what shocked me, absolutely shocked me, was that the London Bullion Market Association uses ICE futures to determine gold, silver, and interest rates, and also other valuations for commodities. So ICE seems to control everything. You had a whole list of all the different things that they've absorbed,
Right.
and those things, I looked at the list, I think on Wikipedia, and started adding up how much money ICE would have had to create this monopoly that they have. They would
Right.
have had to have hundreds of billions of dollars in cash or assets to go out and buy all these companies that made ICE the monopoly that it is, not only for being a clearinghouse, but for all the market exchanges, commodity exchanges. How is this not international RICO?
Well, I mean, it's all those things. It's espionage, it's treason, depending on who's involved. It's RICO, it's racketeering, and it's real clear. You're either in this game or you're not. And if you're not in this game, they define you as Main Street. And there's one set of rules for Main Street on how we relate to cash and debt. And then there's their game. And their game is based on something that I never thought would be this simple. And it's not even about physical gold and silver. And that's the part that really puzzled me for the longest time. It's about the perception of physical gold and silver. You don't even have to have it. All you have to do is believe you have it or get somebody else to believe you have it. And then you're off to the races. And it's actually pretty simple. Let me just go through a simple scenario. Okay, I want to create a gold mine. So I form this gold mine. I get a stellar board. I pick the right auditor, the right lawyer, the right underwriter, the right public relations expert, and I announce that I'm going to file a stock offering and raise money on this new gold mine, gold and silver mine, let's say. And then what else do I need? Well, I need to put something out to the marketplace that says I actually have something that's of value worth investing in. So here's what, and what we've seen here is there are little bits of corruption that are needed at certain points in this system in order to make it work. And one of them is the geologists. And so I'm going to pick a geologist that's in my pocket that's going to give me an assay of the gold ore sitting in the ground or the silver ore sitting in the ground in some far off country. And in fact, Michael Farmer owns 14% of a gold mine in Western Mali in Africa. On the major investors of this Mali gold mine or gold mine, yeah, it's a fake gold mine, in my opinion. He's got Vanguard, he's got Fidelity, he's got what else? Capital Research. He's got all the stellar investors in this, and it looks like a great opportunity. But when you actually read the prospectus, you realize that everything about what they're talking about is futures. They haven't mined anything. They can't even prove there is any gold in the ground. All they're talking about is they're investing in exploration. And based on this, some geologist says this is a valuable holding. So that's all they need to make this happen. Then, based on that, they form a shell company in London. And that shell company then has one duty, and that shell company is to borrow cash from a bank, one of their banks, to invest in this gold mine in way off Mali in this example. Um, and and then they borrow the cash, they loan that money, and wait, the collateral for the money. Okay, this shell company has no activity, so they borrow this cash based on the collateral which they have received from this projection of future value of this gold mine. So the gold mine leases this prospective gold to the shell company, and based on that, the bank gives them a bunch of cash. They turn around and give that cash to this company in Africa, and what they do then is part of the fiddle, because they'll put up something that kind of looks like a gold mine, but since it's all in the ground, you really can't go check. But so you're taking the faith of this geologist, this person that says there's gold, as the basis for this entire scheme. So then within the year, you discover that, oh, we don't really have the gold. So that shell company then, before they've even filed a financial report in the first year, already writes off the investment. The bankers don't care, because in the end, their personnel are taking fees and offshore income from the loan that was created by this bank. So that's where this fiat currency system comes in. That original loan was created from fiat currency based on a fake gold mine. And then they're off to the races. They go through the motions. And in order to do this and to pull it off, they've got to control propaganda. And so that's one of the things that we discovered is that the London Stock Exchange owns Reuters pension fund. So Reuters and the London Stock Exchange and the London Stock Exchange control over ICE, as you've said, Intercontinental Exchange in the US, is all a part of this mechanism that creates fiat currency to fund these loans that then feed these grifters. And they then go through the motions of having a real company when they never had a real company. And that's the magic of a gold and silver mine. You don't actually have to have anything. And in fact, if you look at the prospectuses of all these gold and silver mines, it's amazing the number of these that are exploration. And there's one thing to keep in mind from a legal perspective: it's never illegal to make a mistake or have poor judgment. And so this is how these guys get away with this. They then come back and say, well, this geologist said this, but such and such happened, and all of a sudden there's no gold. Or the system is shifting small amounts of gold into that mine to make it look like it's legit when it's not. And then they keep going. So the next shell company is formed, and then the next shell company is formed, all raising money on a fake gold mine. And that's about as simple as it gets in terms of how new cash, new money is injected into this global system that they've created. And you either have to be in this game or you're not. And that's what we've discovered. And it looks like Michael Farmer, being this metal industries merchant in various metals, is a key facilitator of this grifting system that we call globalism, and we see it headquartered out of London with the Pilgrim Society. Michael Farmer is a baron. He's a life peer, and he just had his son marry Candace Owens. So there you see this relationship between politics and how these people intend to control their grifting system going forward. And I call it grifting. Grifting's kind of small potatoes in a way, but what we see here is it's globalist grifting. It's the highest form of lying that you can possibly have, and this is the way they keep their families fed and watered through the centuries, by just passing on the knowledge of how to do this and how you can fool the public while you do it.
And it's been going on for so long. Look at Cecil Rhodes. It was Rothschild money that helped Cecil Rhodes steal the gold from Rhodesia. And then that
Right.
made him one of the wealthiest men in the world. And then let's talk about the fact that what you said is so true. For instance, Daddy Bush, Bush Senior, the year before he left the White House, sold two dead gold mines to a company called Barrick. When he got out of the presidency, he joined Barrick, and then Barrick started producing tremendous amounts of gold and riding
Magically.
magically on futures. Of course, nobody has ever seen any of this gold. It's all futures. And then we have Bill Clinton, because once you get, as you said, once you're on the inside, once you know this, you might be able to play a little bit. Frank Justrom, Bill Clinton's best friend, one of the biggest gold producers in Canada, is
So he
giving,
says.
says what he says, is giving half of their income to a foundation called the Clinton Justra Sustainability Fund. It's now been changed because when we busted them, they changed the name. But what it is, they went around and they said to all the people doing the fake gold and the fake silver, you have to give us some because we're aware of this. And so you find the biggest names in gold and silver donating huge amounts of money to this Clinton Foundation. What do
Right.
they do with it? Nothing. They
Right.
keep it. That's it. Why? Because they basically busted them. And so this has been going on for a long, long time, that they have these fake golds. Now the new one is the two African countries that have found the largest deposits of gold ore in human history. Two of them within 2 weeks of each other, in countries, just as you said, no one's going to go check. And one of them is controlled by British interests, the other one's controlled by Chinese interests. And so the Chinese always want to step up and say, hey, if you're going to bring gold, we're going to bring our counterfeit gold out, because that's what they do best. 33 tons of counterfeit gold was just discovered in China. They got busted once again after 7,000 fake tons were found
Well,
trying to be put into their own reserves.
you're talking about physical gold there, but as you have said many times about the origins of the currency systems, one of the early holders of gold in London were the Rothschilds, right? And they had a vault, and there was supposedly an X amount of gold in the vault, and then based on that, there would be so much currency or notes, bank notes would be issued against this so-called physical gold. And there would be in the beginning there was a ratio: so many notes, so many ounces of silver based on an ounce of gold. And over time, what the Rothschilds learned is nobody ever checked. So they trusted the paper that said there was gold, but nobody ever actually checked to see if there was gold. And I think over the centuries, I think that eroded into nobody ever checks. We don't really care. So the idea of gold is what we're talking about, not the actual presence of physical gold. I think most of the time. And so that I think was the origin of the futures business. And because you're basically saying in the case of a gold mine, it's a future. You're saying on the basis of what this geologist says, we think we can dig up this amount of gold, and therefore we're going to sell stock in that company based on this futures, this future projection. And so what we see and what Farmer has done, when we started looking at Farmer's companies, one of the things stuck out like a sore thumb in that these companies that he was involved in 2001, 2001, changed their name and sold, quote, to Enron. And we go, whoa, Enron Metals. And then as we dug into that, we saw some very interesting transfers. In one case, in one of his companies, 3 months before the name was changed to Enron, all of the assets of that company were transferred to the European Union and JP Morgan. So there's a bifurcation that occurred. JP Morgan got the gold business, the precious metals business, and this European Union group got everything else. And then we see about the time of the Patriot Act, the theft of our technology, social networking, and the collapse of Enron, which all occurred in the 2001, 2002 timeframe. Then we see them shift that business so that ICE, this intercontinental exchange, supposedly based in the United States, started gobbling up the futures business of all these transactional exchanges, and they focused on futures of everything else except precious metals. They do a little precious metals, but mostly it's everything else, commodities of any kind. And we see that that was the key. They finally used that logic of nobody ever checks to see whether there is actually gold, to use that logic for anything. So what a business. I can sell stock in something that doesn't even exist, and that is the futures business. Now what we've seen in ICE is very interesting, because I see some players that are associated with the theft of our technology. Now that now makes sense, because what we've learned from farmers companies is they emerged out of Germany, out of Frankfurt, Germany, from various Khazarian Jewish families. And it's, by the way, fairly likely, I think, that Farmer's family background is Jewish, although that he doesn't talk about that. But it seems like inevitable that if he was so key to the metals business worldwide, that he would have been within this closely held family relationships coming from Frankfurt. And so what we are learning from his activity is that he was the chief facilitator. I'm not exaggerating, the chief facilitator of this gold and silver fiddle worldwide for mining of fake gold and precious metals, actual metals. And then here's another kicker. We talk about Enron. He's definitely involved with Enron. We can see the transfers in the company's house records and in the SEC records. And then if we go back earlier in his career, he worked for a group out of Germany called Philip Brothers. And his colleague in Philip Brothers was none other than Mark Rich, the man that Bill Clinton pardoned on the day he left office in 2001.
And the king of Glencore, which was
Absolutely.
One of the biggest fake gold companies, which you have noted again and again, had so many ships. They had more ships than the British Navy.
Correct.
Now, that's incredible, but that's the level that we're talking about here. This is fraud on the largest level you can imagine, because the gold that is fake in the ground, the futures, is just like the gold in the gold bullion vault that is owned by the Rothschilds, which is supposedly the gold behind the English, the British fiat currency, and the gold behind really all of the trading for bullion for the London Bullion Market Association, which really is the group that sets the gold and silver and LIBOR rates, but they take it directly from ICE. So it just literally, ICE tells them, and you're like, what? ICE tells them. Now, that gold, just like banking started to be fractionalized, and they started to make it legal that the bank only had to hold 10%, say, of the money that was given to them. The other 90% they could invest, and they only had to hold 10% of all the money that was given to them by their customers. Now it's nothing. Now they're in the hole. They don't have any money. They're not holding any money. And we're seeing this basically is a continuing bankruptcy of our own central bank system and banks. Well, that is the same logic that they use with gold. The gold bullion vault has written paper notes for every ounce there 36,000 times. So they use the asset value of the gold bullion vault times 36,000. And that's the assets then that the owners of that vault have at their disposal. And who is that? Well, it was the Rothschilds. And of course, JP Morgan is nothing more than an agent of the Rothschilds, and you've named them in your article. All these people who are part of this inner group, and it goes back to a company, MG, what is that, Metal Gesellschaft Gold or whatever, MG, and MG was farmers. But what's his middle name?
Stahel.
Which is?
Stahel is German.
It's a German name, right?
Right.
So you're not stretching this too far to notice that the Bacharach family, which became the Rothschild family. Well, we might have here the Stahel family that became the Farmer family. And what is that? That's a name to throw people off of what he does. In
Right.
England, your name usually tells what your ancestors did. He was no farmer. He's the goldmonger, right? And as you said, he's the high priest of Mammon, because when MG sold to Enron, it was right before Enron. In your article, it says this, 1 year before they went bankrupt. Well, they knew when they tried to turn over this gold rigging system to Enron, it was because they were going to hide the assets. That's the only reason they would join a company going down, right? And then they split it so you couldn't track it. And then it comes back on itself. And then what happens? According to your article, Mike, and this is one of the biggest finds that I have seen in years. Michael Farmer basically then became in control with his other buddies of ICE,
Yeah.
Intercontinental Commodity Exchange Incorporated, which basically controls the clearinghouses for the New York Stock Exchange, the London Stock Exchange Group. They're the clearinghouse for derivatives. They're the clearinghouse for all commodities. They own the
Chicago Board of Trade.
Yes, Chicago Board of Trade, the Chicago Commodities Exchange, the New York Commodities Exchange, and the ones in Europe, as well as everything else. Everything where there is, the only thing they don't control is what the Bank for International Settlements controls, which is they have their own clearinghouse for central bank bets on derivatives, which are huge, by the way.
Except that they carved off the precious metals markets to J.P. Morgan Chase. So that now explains why Jamie Dimon went to Eric Holder and basically told him what he was going to do, because Chase has got the control of the story, the propaganda of gold and silver, and we've got this system that includes all these futures for gold mines. And so when you think about it, you think, well, that's perfect, because then you've got an unlimited story. If you're just working with limited physical gold and silver, then that's one story. But they've expanded it into this futures idea so that they can go value things in the ground, and they've created a way of creating unlimited amounts of cash and opportunity for themselves on lies. And here we go back to the story of Mammon, because what we're seeing is Jesus said, you cannot serve God and Mammon. Well, now I can see why. Because if you're serving Mammon, then you're telling lies in order to keep your wealth. And that wealth is fleeting because it's all fake. So our whole monetary system can be proved now to be fake. And one of the things that you used to always say, and I got it, in that the gold-backed currencies. What does that mean, gold-backed currencies? And it seems to mean a lot of things in a lot of different times. But now I get what the bottom line story is. The bottom line story is that gold and silver are used for collateral for loans. And those loans are the fiat currency that is fake. Its value is fake because it's based on stories of gold and silver rather than actual physical gold and silver. And then it's let out into the marketplace, and you have a group of companies that know that's the story, and therefore they start doing transactions with that other inside company, and that becomes the stock market.
Absolutely. And Mammon is not supposed to incarnate in this world. He is a demon on a higher level, probably at the archangelic level or the spirit of time level by now, because materialism is led by Mammon. So, and Mammon loves to control through the devils of greed and lust and power. And so, what we're looking at here is you have now discovered the skeletal system of the incarnating being of Mammon, in my opinion. This is the demonic system, which is perfectly legal. There's laws that make all this legal, especially in England, where the Queen and her group of fraudulent flunkies who control these things cannot be prosecuted. Of course, they're innocent before they began. And even if they were caught, they'd go to one of their shell companies, exactly as your beautiful meme that shows the way that this money, this gold and silver system uses the assets, and this is all about asset management. Who's the number one force on the
Right.
face of the earth right now? The largest asset management company there is has actually been put in control of the American economy. They gave it over to Blackstone. They literally said, "You are now in control. What are you going to do? Can you help us?" And then what did they start to do? Buy all the real estate. So they bought with scams that were astounding and unlimited money. So asset management companies are about paper. They're not about real things.
Yeah, let me interrupt there. One of the things that becomes obvious now in this timeline is what else was going on around Enron. And I actually believe that Enron was a made for TV movie. It was always fake from the beginning. It was a false flag. But they needed some way of reorganizing their commodities business and making it simpler for them. They wanted to create ICE and they wanted to get all the metals business over to JP Morgan. So they create this huge international crisis of unbelievable. I mean, it's scandalous how many corporations. I think there's thousands of corporations that were created within the span of a couple of years with Enron's name on it. And I think all of that was to create this huge financial scandal that would then have to be fixed by these same people that created the scandal. And that's how they shifted everything. So they did the Enron scandal, they did 9/11 false flag. And then here's two other things they did. And we've seen these for 10 years. But the judicial conference, this is the conference that discusses the ethics of our judges and attorneys. And they created this 14-page monstrosity that essentially changed the ethics disclosure rules so that a judge could buy a mutual fund and would not have to disclose the controlling companies inside that fund, but could just give the name of the fund, like Fidelity or T. Rowe Price or any fund name like that. So essentially, all of the backroom dealing that's occurring between the judge and these corporations inside these mutual funds could be hidden from public view, and the judge would not then have to disclose it. So that happened in the judicial conference, and it also happened in the Office of Government Ethics, OGE, that manages all the financial disclosures for our public officials. They also rewrote their rules to something called the Safe Harbor Rule. I love their names. That would essentially mean that public officials didn't have to disclose the underlying corporate controllers of these mutual funds. So, bottom line is, mutual funds became the method by which all of our public officials were able to hide their dealing with these grifters on an international basis, and that's the level of sin that we're dealing with here. I doubt if there are very few public officials that aren't already tainted by this system.
Oh, I think almost every single person in the West, whether it's your retirement fund, whether it's your mortgage, whether it's anything you've done with stock, whether it's your bank, it doesn't matter. It's on the New York Stock Exchange, which is a casino for Lord Mammon.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a tax-free casino. Think of that. $1.4 quadrillion are bought or value is exchanged on the stock market each year, and only a fraction of that is ever taxed. When you're talking about commodities, same thing. It's what happens to you at the end of the year. And if you have a shill company that loses money, well, then you never pay taxes. You just join the two together. And this is what you were pointing out before. So whether it is derivatives, whether it's stocks, whether it's any of the casinos that ICE controls, it all is a tax ripoff. And that money usually goes through hedge funds into offshore accounts, which of course are in British United Kingdom domains. And so what we're seeing here is this is a process that is old. It's not going away. I don't know any other way to deal with this than to crash it uh, because these people have vested interests that are part of their corporate lineage, their
Right.
dynasty. They're not giving this up. It'd be like taking food out of their baby's mouth. Not only
Right.
that, when they bring someone in like a farmer, look at what they do. They make him a baron. They put him as a life peer in the city of London at Bishopsgate. I don't know that you could get any closer to the Queen's aprons than that. I would suggest that he's probably part of the Privy Council's secret chamber because he is the man who, with the Enron scandal, where all this money turned out being, foisted on the American public, it became our debt when Enron faltered. But the first thing that Michael Farmer did was hide his whole gold manipulation deal in Enron and then get it all scattered out so no one could follow it. And the first thing he did is what? He started buying the futures that Enron had bought. So he
Right.
bought $61 million worth of natural gas futures, all again because he found out he doesn't have to handle anything physical. It's all just in paper. It's in futures, and it's all in computers owned by ICE, which is
Right.
the clearinghouse. They own the
That's why they
market.
have to control Reuters, and they do control Reuters. ICE's pension fund is the London Stock Exchange pension fund is Reuters. So yeah, these guys have got every angle covered. Now, one of the things interesting about Farmer is after the Enron scandal debacle, fake, he started a company called Red Kite. Various companies called Red Kite, dozens of them. And over the next 9 years, he then became the most notable trader in the world. He had a 20% annual return on his investments for 9 years straight. When the average among those investors, those top investors he was compared to, was 3%. So 3 times the return of the best investors of the world, which they identify as T. Boone Pickens and George Soros and I can't want to say Jimmy Buffett, Warren Buffett. Um, Probably it would be better if they had Jimmy Buffett in that group.
That's right. Pass my shaker of salt. That's right. Now, I want people to imagine this. Okay, it's my little fantasy, but imagine the Queen on any particular day calls in her secret chamber, and who's in it? Jeffrey Patty, the man who created Serco, one of the biggest rip-off companies, British companies stealing from America more probably than any other single source, Serco.
Right.
And then that Lord Mark Malloch Brown sitting there. Well, he controls the elections in 17 countries at least, and certainly in America, he selects who will be elected. And then you have Michael, how do you say it?
Stay hell, or stall. One of the two. I don't know.
Stahl, Michael Stahl Farmer sitting there saying, and she can look at him and say, now, are we getting our full lion's share of the metals market, Michael? And then Jeffrey Patty can say, well, if you want, I can create a war in Uganda, and we can have a fake gold mine that is now under fire, which will then receive US aid, crown money. This is the kind of conversations these people would be
Right.
having.
Right.
Who cares how many people die in Uganda in the war or where the new gold is found? I guarantee you, the two places that the biggest gold ore strikes have been found, two of the largest in history, guaranteed it's going to now have political problems. Guaranteed there's going to be a war in those countries
Right.
to of course,
It keeps the accountants out. It keeps anybody that wants to actually see if it exists out.
exactly. And they've been doing this since the Transvaal with good old Cecil Rhodes. They learned it a long time ago. They learned how to manipulate these things. They learned how to set up these systems. And your beautiful meme that's in your article is so instructive because it shows you exactly how they do it. Your one on Optech showed you exactly how Mark Malloch Brown controls elections. Right? You
Right.
cannot deny it if you follow that little flow chart. And you cannot deny what you are pointing out here that Michael Farmer, Candace Owen, who is, of course, the presumed vice president or president of America with Ron DeSantis, and then later maybe by herself. George, as you said, good old Michael Farmer sacrificed his son George to have to marry the lady who is the actress who's playing like she's a conservative now, exactly as Michael Farmer played like he's a Christian.
Right. Yeah, that's another angle of the story, which is a little bizarre, in that he indicates that at the age of about 35, he became an evangelical Christian and is now funding various nonprofit organizations, funding different church organizations. And here again, you don't ever know what's in somebody's heart. So in this case, you have to look at what they do, not what they say. And what they do is he is facilitating this mammonic system worldwide, and he hasn't stopped. And he hasn't confessed any sins. He hasn't shown any level of repentance. It's just words. And what he is good at are these words. But when you actually think about it, see, most Christians, in my experience, are very forgiving. They take people at face value. They have the attitude, I'm going to trust this person until that person's proven untrustworthy. But when you actually look at everything that Michael Farmer's doing right now in the Christian world, there's always a dampener on everything. And so you really can't understand why he's doing what he's saying. He's quite apologetic whenever he talking about his Christian faith in the city, and a number of interviews, very detailed interviews, go into that in pretty good detail. And what you see is someone who was approved by this group to be a Christian in this environment. But then when you go back and you look at the very detailed histories of this MG Metals company out of Germany, you see that there is absolutely no way that they would let somebody into their inner core unless they were family. And these are all Khazarian Jewish families from area around Frankfurt, which, by the way, is where the Rothschilds are from, where Hesse is. Frankfurt is in Hesse, the county, and Hesse is where the Hessians came that fought against the Americans for the British in the American Revolution. And now what we have seen is that the very first banks that Alexander Hamilton created, one of them was the Manhattan Bank, which is now Chase Manhattan, and that happens to be J.P. Morgan Chase that controls the metals business. So that's part of this history that's intriguing, that it has always been about the Jewish activity in economics in Germany, where the Jews were not allowed to own property. So what they got into was commodities and trading and metals and those kinds of businesses, and they never let go of those. And at the same time, they were cutting deals with the monarchs and the peers in Germany and England to be their interest-bearing banks, so that, in a sense, the Rothschilds and the Jewish families that run the banks in Germany could accommodate these greedy Christian monarchs and landed peers. So that, the question is, what's the chicken and the egg? Who's really to blame for this system? And can you blame the Rothschilds for charging interest when that's what the monarchs wanted? Or do you blame the monarchs because they're so violently betraying some key tenets of the Christian faith? I don't think you can decide that. They're both wrong. And that's the system that we have inherited. That's the system that has so layered itself upon our public life that I think you're right. I think it's got to crash. The whole thing's got to crash. You can't fix this. It's so inbred now. And all the accounting firms are in on it. All the major law firms are in on it. All the major underwriters for sure are in on it. And we've got our key corporations, all of our blue chip companies are in on this system that's based on this fundamental idea that I'm going to borrow money, I'm going to leased gold that doesn't exist in some mine in far off Africa. I'm going to take that cash. I'm going to feed it out to all my cronies. I'm going to pretend to do business. And then when that money dries up, we'll get some from the government with USAID and OPIC and all these government funds, and we'll let that run out. And then as soon as that's all done, we'll go out and create another shell company in England and make up some new story about some new find and some new future. And the average public will believe it. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt, and they'll start that system all over again. And that's the system they have. It's not based on creating anything except stories, and it's fake, in my view.
Yes, I had a complaint from someone that I know who said, just because Candace Owens is in that family doesn't mean she's going to take on the same philosophical bent that Michael Farmer would. I mean, you got to give her a chance to be free, and she won't follow necessarily the evil path of her family. No, that doesn't happen. So, what is the agenda that Michael Farmer has for Candace Owens? I assume it's just to keep things going as they have been. The bureaucratic bowing to the Serco, bowing to the Crown agents, bowing to everything British, bowing to the Five Eyes Agreement, bowing, bowing, bowing. Pretty soon, it seems as if my life is controlled by the Queen of England. So is Meghan Markle, who's attempting to become political with her eyes probably on the White House or something bigger if there was a king or queen, they'd want that. And now you have Candace Owens, who is a liar, basically, an actress, has this bizarre marriage that she doesn't tell anybody about, has brought over what's a baron's son called? I don't care. But anyway, she's married a baron's son, and he could become a baron eventually because right. His dad's a life peer.
No,
No,
Michael Farmer's a life peer. They would have to shift that to multi generational peerage, which they probably hold out as a carrot. That would be my guess.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, as soon as Candace is vice president or president,
okay, well,
maybe he'll
let
get
me
it.
address your earlier example of Candace. Candace could be in that system without being tainted. And for anybody that's ever had an experience with a dysfunctional family member, you know that can't happen over time. In that, for an alcoholic, if you have an alcoholic in your family, they're your family member. They're never going to be not be your family member. So as that alcoholism continues, what tends to happen, and this is well known, is that everyone else in the family adapts their behavior to the dysfunction. In other words, they stay away from it, they don't deal with it, they don't challenge the person about certain subjects, and blah, 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 blah. And over time, that becomes a part of your behavior, and they call it codependent behavior. And you then accommodate the dysfunction by your inability to get away from it. And I think that's why the logic that she could be in that system without absorbing the values doesn't work. And at very minimum, she's going to end up being in Stockholm syndrome, where she's going to accommodate what they're thinking simply because she hears it all the time and is not countered. So I think that while that's theoretically maybe possible, I don't see that tends to happen. Alcoholism is a good example. Any other dysfunction that people have in work, when they have a dysfunctional boss that they can't do anything about, over time, the actual organization itself becomes dysfunctional as it adapts to the dysfunctional boss. And that again is well known. I used to be in organizational development and came into many situations like that. And we would actually do organizational interventions around that particular subject, because unless something from the outside comes in, that system will continue. It's just sort of inevitable.
Yeah, and Turning Point USA, which she's the big speaker for, she just pops out of nowhere, and pretty soon she's interviewing the president, Trump, and she whatever she says makes international news, and then she goes to England
Yeah,
for
she's got a lot of publicity.
Turning Point UK. I'm sorry, uh, I don't believe anyone in Britain is interested in your Turning Point UK, Candace Owens, and
Right.
I believe that it was simply a fake reason for you to go over and be fully initiated and brainwashed into this aristocratic system, which is very alluring to some people. Some people think
Sure.
that it is the ultimate expression to be knighted by the queen. I mean, look at Michael Farmer. He received what do you call it, a baronry,
Baronship.
a baronship.
He's a baron. He was made a baron. He
Yeah.
skipped the sir designation, went right to baron.
Oh, so he jumped over being a knight.
Yes,
Oh, isn't that lovely?
he's a lord.
And I'm sure that things come with that, certain privileges, certain
Oh yeah,
income, certain association. And then he's going to be in the parliament now because he's a life peer, right? Forever, right?
yeah. He's an active peer in the parliament.
As a lord, who, by
Right.
the way, on one certain day he wasn't a lord, and the next day he was a lord. Isn't that
Mhm.
amazing? And that made him a higher, more developed person, closer to the divine, exactly like the monarchy. Oh no, that's right. I'm being facetious. And Henry VIII was one of the grossest, most disgusting people to think that he's the head of his own church, and now they think that his pseudo descendants carry on the divine right of kings. Gag me with a spoon. That's disgusting. And to think that we care about Meghan Markle marrying uh, whoever, I don't care if he's going to be the king. Who cares? As a matter of fact, in my book, if you're a monarch or a part of an aristocratic family in Britain, then you are a suspect for a murder, for genocide, for depopulation through pharmaceutical manipulation and murder, and all the other things that you're so well not known for because your propaganda is so effective. But I don't go for it. I don't care if you have a British accent. Candace Owens, who will undoubtedly have one before too long, just like Meghan Markle. Why? Because it's been proven. If you speak with a British accent, people believe you. Why? Because their propaganda has been so effective since the time they took over America with Five Eyes. And it's not been changed one iota, except that the control, as your article has demonstrated, has proven that the mechanisms behind this type of manipulation is so profound and so comprehensive and so ensconced that you know we're probably not going to get rid of it unless there's a
No,
critical
I mean
mass
it's
of
got it.
people.
The system they've created, it creates unlimited cash for itself. Now, the question is, what's gone wrong with it? Why would they want to reset this? That I'm not sure I know the answer to yet, but we can certainly see the symptoms of what they've created, and it's been quite effective for them for a long time. But I think that this idea that you can continue to create gold mines and gold mine stories in this day of hovercraft and satellite imagery and things like this is probably gone, or it's diminishing, because you can check, and the more you can check, the more this system has a problem. Now, here's another issue that we looked at with the Enron scandal. One of the things they've done is that ICE has absorbed all the futures market related to
Yeah.
carbon credits, and that's appears to be the ultimate futures, is create mathematics out of the stuff of life and then control that. And I think these guys are laughing all the way to the bank. Futures, we're going to control carbon. We're going to own the market on carbon. Then they don't even need gold mines.
Ever since the British tried to get the United Nations to have the banco, one world currency, they have never let up, and this will be the new world currency. And since 2010, ICE has, I believe it was 2010, I may be misquoting that, but anyway, but for many years, they've owned a market for carbon credits.
Yeah.
In other words, they set this up a long, long time
Oh,
ago.
they did.
So therefore, I have to assume that they're ready to take over the world with some type of digital currency also. And notice that what is happening here in America, Biden is basically saying, get ready, the central bank digital currency is coming whether you like it or not. And
Well, we linked to the London Stock Exchange Group's latest financials from 2021. And in that, you'll see the accounting for carbon credits. And many of these globalist companies have already included it. Why? I think it's because they're running out of their gold reserve story is starting to wane, and they need a new one. And this is a good new one because this is forever. Then,
I'm expecting there will be a global gold back digital currency. But to do that, first the markets will have to crash and get confused, like when Michael Farmer moved his gold operations over to Enron just so they could go bankrupt, so they could hide where it went. I think they'll pull up the gold from the Zurich gold bullion vaults and move it into the market, and it somehow will become a backing for some type of global gold currency. And they think that that will be the answer. I'm sorry. As soon as there's a coronal mass injection towards the Earth, that entire digital system would be wiped out in the blink of an eye. I don't believe in such things, but I do believe in the absolutely ruthless and inhuman planning of these British pilgrims who, in fact, are grooming Candace Owens to enter the White House so that things can continue as they always have. Britain first.
yeah, yeah, and we've got to keep in mind that this Pilgrim Society group is the group that created war concentration camps, starting in the Transvaal and moving forward through Germany. And so that's the level of their depravity on full display, and it has not changed. And I think we have talked about this before, this Sabbatean Frankism that the Rothschilds really funded and got off the ground is an anti human philosophy, spirituality that basically says whatever the Ten Commandments say, we will do the opposite. Because they say, since we can't be all good, let's be all bad. I mean, people can't believe that. But that is, in fact, what these people have been doing for centuries. And now we see that these lies are starting to be exposed. How did we get here? We have to thank Candace Owens for that, because it was looking at her family and her new marriage that led us to this knowledge of Michael Stahel Farmer. And he is one of the biggest withheld stories, I think, of all of our research.
Absolutely. And we have to thank you for doing this. I had known that ICE was evil, but I didn't have a face on it. And I certainly didn't think it was being controlled out of Britain. It says that their headquarters are in Atlanta, Georgia. Isn't that nice? No. So thank you, first off, to Betsy, Betsy
Yeah.
Ross. It was Tyler who said to us, to you particularly, would you please figure out who Candace is? She just had an intuition that something was horribly wrong there. To think we would come up with this, it's truly mind-boggling.
Right. Yeah, and I mentioned it earlier, but there's a connection between ICE and the whole digital world, the Pilgrim Society world of social networking that was stolen from us, and that's a guy by the name of Noonan, who has just become a new director of ICE. And he was a longtime employee of IBM, and then at the time of Mark Rich being pardoned by Clinton, there was an appointment the previous day. Our patent attorney, James B. Chandler, while we're working with him, and Bill Gates were appointed to something called the National Infrastructure Assurance Council. Now, doesn't that sound great?
It
They're
sounds
going
wonderful.
to, I mean, they're going to assure that we have national infrastructure. Anyway, one of the early directors was this Noonan cat, and he has been there for since 2001 up to the current time. He has been a part of this NAIC, and this NAIC has been essentially the driver for the technology strategy of DARPA, of Facebook, of Google, of the entire electronic infrastructure. And isn't it curious that we see him now going on ICE? Because one of the things we found in our research is that this MG company out of Germany that goes back into the 1800s identified very early on that the market acknowledged that they were probably the most sophisticated communication system on the planet for keeping track of their metals business worldwide. And so there we see a practical example of how controlling communications, which then for them became Reuters, and the Empire Press Union in 1909, uh, is key and essential to keeping their system out of the hands of we the people, and make sure that they continue to control their ability to create this fake money. And here we have one of their key players now has gone on ice because they know that that's how they do that. And they have to have a monopoly. That's why they don't want any competition here. It's the only way this works.
Absolutely. Once they centralize that computer, one computer can control so much that Michael Farmer said, well, I might as well just take over the rest of the world because
Yep.
they developed it in Germany. It worked. And he said, okay, let's go for it. And then they set up the scam with Enron. And then they basically took over all exchanges. And so right now, I would say that it looks as if the Queen's golden share for owning the world has become even more pervasive than what we had revealed before.
Right.
So, Michael, thank you. Thank the miners. This is incredible finds that you brought up to light. These are two nuggets of gold. And hopefully, this will put a fire underneath some of these people so that they don't show their face in public and maybe, retreat a bit. But as we said before, this may take the collapse of these systems before we can actually do a correction for
Well,
it.
if Michael has any sincerity at all in his alleged Christian conversion, then I would encourage him to confess his sins, repent of those sins, and start uh, providing restitution for all the victims of his activity these last 50 years.
Amen.